Hello everyone, I am Dr. Urja Ranjan Sinha, Assistant Professor of English, D.P. Vipra College, Bilaspur. Today I am going to deal with Oscar Wilde's short story, The Selfish Giant. But before I start the story, let me give you a brief description about the author. Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin on 16th October 1854 and died on 30th November 1900. His full name was Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde. He was an Anglo-Irish poet, playwright, novelist, short story writer, a critic, and an editor. He was indeed a versatile genius. He was an idealist having great aesthetic taste. He belonged to the Victorian age, but he did not imbibe the spirit of Victorianism. He was not didactic, but his writings carried message with regard to living. He was concerned with happiness of human beings. He decried the ways and circumstances which cause human suffering. He had evolved a technique to deal with suffering and creating conditions for human happiness. Naturally, he could succeed in his mission if he resorted to write fairy tales. Now, let me start with the story of the selfish giant. The story of the selfish giant is one of the famous fairy tales. The story is allegorical and is more likely a symbolic interpretation of the Christian parable of Jesus and the children. Here, in the story of the selfish giant, there are two characters, one the selfish giant and the other are the children. The giant, the selfish giant, stands for ego, and the one who is egoistical will be haughty, obstinate, stubborn, selfish, and a dominating character. So here, this selfish giant was also of the same temperament, whereas the children, they symbolize the source of happiness. They represent innocence, love, freedom, kindness, compassion, and generosity. Let me start with the text of the selfish giant. But I'm not going to read out the whole of the story. I'll take just the important portions which give you an idea about the story. Let me start the story. The Selfish Giant. The Selfish Giant was published in 1888. Every afternoon, as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. How happy we are, they cried to each other. The giant had a beautiful garden, and the children loved to play in that particular garden. One day, the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend the Cornish og and had stayed with him for 7 years. So, after spending 7 years with the Cornish og, which was his friend, he returned back to his own garden. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried with a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. Gruff voice, he shouted so loudly in a harsh tone to the children that the children, hearing to the voice of this giant, they ran away. My own garden," said the giant. As he was a giant, he was ugly looking also. He was massive, he was tall, and an egoistical person. So the children, when they saw him, they got scared and they ran away. But then, when this giant told everyone that that garden belongs to him only. My own garden, my own garden. When we say my, that shows your selfishness. So here also in these lines we can see the selfishness of the giant. My own garden is my own garden, said the giant. Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play it in it but myself. So he built a high wall around and put up a notice board. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Now, this was the legal notice which he put outside the gate. Trespassers, the one who enters into someone's land without taking any permission, that is a trespasser, will be prosecuted. Will be prosecuted means the criminal proceedings would be done against that person who will trespass. He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and the little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. Let us see, just see that all over the spring season could be seen, but only in the garden of giant the winter was there and spring did not enter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children and the trees forgot to bloom. The reason himself, the reason itself has been given to you, that as children were not there in the garden, the spring did not want to enter the garden. Spring season, as we all know, that symbolizes the present happiness, joy, love, hope, freshness, rebirth, and growth. Whereas winter represents or symbolizes past sufferings, harshness, loneliness, death, and detachment. So had winter just wanted to stay there in the garden of a giant, as it was a selfish giant. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost people. These are in the form of the snow, and the frost are in the form of persons. So it's a personification. The only people who were pleased were the snow. Snow represents sadness, bleakness, or death. And frost symbolizes rigidity, frigidity, and lack of love. Spring had forgotten this garden. They cried, so we will live here for the year around. The snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them. Here, the north wind also symbolizes anger, violence, and anxiety. And as winter was there, the snow and frost were also there. They had invited the north wind to stay with them in that particular garden. He was wrapped in furs, and he rode all day about the garden and blew the chimney pots down. This is a delightful spot, he said. We must ask the hail on a visit. Now they want to invite hail with them. So the hail came. Hail again represents destruction. Every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates, and then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in grey, and his breath was like ice. See, all our personifications. These were all because of giant's selfishness. That winter, or the frost, or the snow, or the north wind, or the hail, they just want to stay in that garden, whereas spring, it doesn't want to come, as children were not there. I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming, said the selfish giant. Now he feels pain because spring was not coming. But he did not understand, or he is unable to understand, what's the reason behind. But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. She means the autumn season. He is too selfish, she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through trees. One morning the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It was really only a little linnet singing inside the garden, but he saw outside the window. The hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. I believe the spring has come at last, said the giant, and he jumped into the bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see, there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms. Just see, the spring had arrived. And spring had arrived when the children had crept inside the garden. The birds were flying about the twittering and delight, and the flowers were looking up through the garden green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene, only in one corner it was still winter. In the whole garden, the spring could be seen, but only in just one corner the winter was there. Why it was so? It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all round crying bitterly. Only in that particular tree the little boy was there, and he was unable to climb the tree. As he was unable to climb the tree had winter. It was covered with all snow. Now the giant's heart melted as he looked out. How selfish I have been, he said. Now I know why the spring would not come here. I'll put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I'll knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever. He was really very sorry for what he had done. Now, here in this paragraph, we see the main theme of the story. The main theme is the theme of self realization, as the giant realizes himself that he was wrong. What he was doing, he was wrong there. And there is a change in the heart of the giant, or transformation could be seen in the giant, as he became kind-hearted, he became humble, he became liberal, and he became virtuous also, because he could see now that with the entrance of the children, the spring could come in the garden of the giant. Otherwise, it was all winter, it was dead. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly and went out into the garden. So, by opening the garden gate to the children, he in a way opened his heart of love for children. He allowed the children to play in his garden forever, so that the spring could be seen in his garden also. As the giant took the little boy gently in his hand and put him into the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his two arms and flung them round the giant's neck and kissed him. So, when this little boy, who was unable to climb the tree, the giant helped this little boy in climbing the tree. And the little boy was so happy that he stretched his hands and he kissed on the forehead of the giant. All the day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye. The children were allowed to play in the garden daily, and when in the evening hours, when they were about to go, they used to say goodbye to the giant daily. But where is your little companion? He said. The boy I put into the tree. The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him. We don't know, answered the children. He has gone away. Every afternoon, when the school was over, the children came and played with the giant. But the little boy whom the giant loved was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all the children, yet he longed for this, his first little friend. Years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He could not play about any more, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games and admired his garden. I have many beautiful flowers, he said, but the children are the most beautiful flowers at all. This was the realization. That, as I told you earlier also, that children were the source of happiness, of cheerfulness, of playfulness, of love, celebrations. So he realized this thing, that with the coming of children into the garden, the spring was there. It certainly was a marvelous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were all golden and silver, fruit hung down from them, and underneath it stood the little boy he had loved. All of a sudden, what happened? That one day this giant, when he saw outside in the garden, that was a marvelous sight, that a tree, the same particular tree was there, and the same child, little child was also there. He could see both, and downstairs ran the giant in great joy. And out into the garden he hastened across the grass and came near to the child. Now, this little boy represents Jesus Christ. And the tree on which he just wanted to climb was represented as the cross of Jesus. And when he came quite close, his face red with anger, and he said, "Who had dared to wound thee?" For the palms of the child's hands were the prints of two nails, and the prints of two nails were on the little feet. These wounds signify the wounds of Christ received when he was crucified on the cross. "Who had dared to wound thee?" cried the giant. When the giant saw, and when he went near to the child, and when he saw that he is badly wounded, he he felt very bad, and he just asked the boy, "Who has given so many wounds to you? Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him." "Nay," answered the child, "but these are the wounds of love." The little child just replied, "These are the wounds of love." "Nay, who art thou?" said the giant. The giant realized here one thing, that that little child was not an ordinary child. And a strange awe fell on him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant and said to him, "You let me play once in your garden. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." Now here in this line, the things have been confirmed when the little child says that he wants to take the giant to the garden of paradise, that he was no other than Jesus Christ. And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossom. So, giant was dead now. He had attained the everlasting peace. And the white blossoms, we all know that the color of white color symbolizes purity. So Jesus had rewarded this giant for his good actions and had given him the place in heaven. And what was the good actions which he did were that he became generous, he became kind hearted, he became lovable, he became humble, and he had chosen the right model path. So now there was no selfishness in the character of The giant, his soul has become pure and sacred, and he had attained salvation. So, this was the story of selfish giant, and I have evaluated this critically also. And I hope that you have enjoyed the story. Thank you very much. Goodbye.